Good evening from India. My name is Rajkumar. I'm the founding Vice Chancellor of OP Jindal Global University. Good morning to people in North America and Canada and other parts of the world. It's indeed my proud privilege to welcome all of you to the 10th thematic session of this conference on the theme Role of Emotional Intelligence in Law School Governance. We have a very distinguished set of individuals, leaders in their own right, thoughtful individuals who have contributed to the transformation of legal education in different parts of the world. Let me begin by introducing my dear friend and colleague, Professor Dr. Stephen P. Marks, François-Xavier Bagnoud, Professor of Health and Human Rights at the Harvard University, also a very distinguished member of the International Board of Advisors and also member of the governing body of OP Jindal Global University. We have with us Professor Christiana Ochoa, another dear friend, Professor of Law at the Indiana University Maurer School of Law, Bloomington, also academic director of the Indiana University Mexico Gateway. Thank you, Christy, for joining us. We have Professor Ronald Weich, the Dean of the School of Law of University of Baltimore, United States, and Professor Dr. Ian Holloway, Dean of the Faculty of Law, University of Calgary, Canada, Professor Dr. Jorge Arturo Cerdio Herran, who is the head of the Academic Department of Law, Academic Department of Economics, Law, and Social Sciences at the Instituto Tecnológico, Autónomo, Mexico. I'm sorry about that. We have with us these individuals. I want to say that I deeply appreciate the presence of all of you and participation in this conference, as it has brought together like-minded people from around the world in engaging in a conversation about the reimagination and transformation of legal education. Some of that reimagination and transformation will go beyond the COVID-19 crisis that we are facing today. So with those words, I hand this panel over to Steve to take this forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raj, and good evening to those of you who are in India and other places. It's late for you. Amazing that you've stayed up. This conference has been going on for the last 12 hours, and welcome to the panelists. It's midday for those of us who are in the Western Hemisphere. Our topic is the role of emotional intelligence in law schools. And by way of introduction, I would like to recall that this term entered into behavioral psychology around the year 1964-65, which happens to be the time that I was at Stanford Law School as a student. So I was a very young student at the time. So my encounter with legal education was one that led me to confront my own emotions in a way that I didn't really think about whether and to what extent my teachers and the deans and so on should be attentive to my emotions. They were challenging me to rise up to understand how to analyze cases and how to argue and so on. So I was struck by the keynote address for this conference given by Cyril Schroff, who spoke about, and I tried to recall my own legal education, that legal education seems to be focused on the I, which means a vertical line that shows you're trying to dig down and grasp your understanding of the law, and this fails to understand what he attaches importance to in legal education is adding the T, which has, and I think I had it in law school because besides the focus on the depth of law, there was also a broadening, that's what attracted me to law, a broadening of the range of fields that you need to embrace to be able to do that in a competent way. But what was missing is what he calls the delta. And the delta includes a range of other expertise, in addition to the expertise in law. It requires expertise in design thinking and technical skills, but also, and this is the third part of the triangle in the delta, is personal awareness and emotional intelligence. So it is quite interesting for our panel, the 10th panel of this conference, that the opening keynote address anticipated what we're doing and challenged the legal community to think in terms of a delta rather than an I or a T. Now, emotional intelligence as we know, has been defined and in various ways, and that has evolved in the literature as the ability to perceive, use, understand, and manage emotions. And this panel is going to examine how law schools, in adapting to the times that confront us, have introduced or should introduce an understanding of the appropriate ways to perceive, use, understand, and manage emotional intelligence. And the first question I would like to address to Christiana Ochoa, and it has to do with the challenges that we face now in creating a climate conducive to reinvention. We're supposed to be reconsidering teaching methods, the profession, all kinds of things, but we're in established law schools where we have expected ways of doing things. So what needs to be done so that law school leadership can be open to reinventing, can call upon colleagues, administrators, deans, vice deans, professors, to the leadership of the law school to create a climate congenial for reinventing? Christiana, would you like to take that question?
Yeah. So first, thank you, Stephen, for moderating this panel, and it's great to be on this panel with everybody. And thank you to Vice President Kumar for his generous invitation. I want to I think the beginning of that answer is a very trite answer, which is that necessity is the mother of invention, and we've certainly all lived under unanticipated necessity for the last number of months. So I'm currently on sabbatical, which is why I don't currently have the Executive Associate Dean title behind my name, but I was in the Executive Associate Dean position last year when the pandemic came our way. And as any of us in leadership roles in law schools right now or during that time are aware, there were immediate and necessary reinventions that had to happen. And that happened largely through collaborations and collaborative conversations with other deans at other law schools, with other executive associate deans at other law schools, with the accrediting agencies in our various countries, in order to allow us to have classes online, in order to give credit for those classes online, in order to expand the amount of classes that could be offered online. And then in order, for example, for law schools generally across the United States anyway, to decide to grade on a pass-fail basis under extraordinary circumstances last spring semester. And then again to collaborate to decide that that was no longer a viable and tenable option over the long term, meaning when we reconvened in the fall. I think the collaborations that occurred as a result of the emergencies that were coming our way in February and March did give rise to a great deal of really generous collaboration and creativity and invention. And I think that's been wonderful. And I do think that there's obviously now, as a result, we dealt with the emergencies and the necessary inventions. And now we're seeing some of the opportunities that are giving us some opportunities to invent by choice. And that, I think, is the great fun of this period, as opposed to what we were going through from about February to August when the semester began.
So the climate for reinvention has been there, I guess. You've been able to engage the leadership of the law school in taking these measures that depart from business as usual. Let me ask Ron to join in here and add anything you'd like on that point. And if you could also address the question of the mental health issues that arise in your relations with students and faculty. How do you create a sense of psychological safety? So Ron, if you'd like to add anything to the first question of creating a climate congenial for reinvention, and add your thoughts on creating a sense of psychological safety. And then
thank you, Steve.
Ask that same question to the others.
Sure. Thanks very much, Steve, for moderating, and so glad to be with others. And thanks to Jindal for inviting us to be here. We were saying before the session formally started that one silver lining of the pandemic and our new Zoom-focused world is that we get to be together from so many different locations much more easily than we would otherwise. So I very much agree with Christiana that the necessity of the pandemic has presented opportunities. I feel as though we have grown a new limb. Our faculty has had to learn to use these remote technologies, not just Zoom, but many other platforms, and to adapt. Of course, in the spring, we had to do it abruptly. Now, over the course of the summer, we were able to prepare for the fall semester more intentionally. And it really has added to our abilities, more tools in the tool chest, to add another metaphor. So I think that does create an opportunity for reinvention. I believe that we will be back to, at least at my school, the University of Baltimore, largely in-person instruction when the pandemic is over. But certainly we're going to take advantage of the skills that we've learned and what we've seen works better in a remote format to make our curriculum more textured, more exciting for students, and to enrich the experience for students based on this new set of skills. As to mental health, Steve, that's a very important point. This has been stressful. While we can emphasize the positive, this has been stressful for everybody, for students, faculty, staff, and certainly for deans. And how are we all dealing with mental health? Well, specifically for our students, I hope that every campus, and mine certainly does, have a program, a student assistance program, to which we can refer students who are really struggling. Counseling is available. It's largely remote, but that is how everybody is doing counseling these days. And then it puts extra emphasis on the structure within a law school administration, specifically our dean of students, and he has people who work with him, a director of student support and a director of diversity initiatives, who's very involved in working with students to make sure that they know that there is support and that we can work with them individually, because in the Zoom classroom, it's very easy to kind of disappear. And we don't want that. Professors are making extra efforts to reach every student, and the law school administration through these specified programs must do that as well. So we are doing that, but I don't want to pretend that we've got it all solved. Our students are struggling with kind of loneliness and dislocation, and we do our best, but it's a rough time for everybody. Let's acknowledge that.
Jorge, could I ask you to reflect on these two first dimensions of responding to the current situation and using emotional intelligence to create a climate congenial for reinvention? If we're going to change things, everybody has to be on board. How do you do that? And then how do you address the question of psychological safety? Jorge, do you have some thoughts on these?
Yes, I do. I must say that on my law school, at least, one of the first things that I noticed late on May and then now on this starting fall is that professors felt a bit lonely trying to reinvent themselves. Not so much because of the tools that we offered them. We did rediscover the notion of technological design thinking, or, for example, the idea of implementing design on lectures, but not so much because of the availability of the tools, but how are they going to feel comfortable and then to convey that confidence to students in classrooms. So we did realize that we need to have small group conversations about how we felt about these transitions and what were the fears for faculty engaging into this new scenario. And then I would say to these small committee conversations end up being more permanent throughout the semester because we realized the need of having a specific forum to, as we got into the term, using these tools to remedy certain scenarios. Because of the mental health stress of students, because of how they understood they were going to behave into a remote classroom, and also how can we, so to speak, calibrate the expectations between students and professors into what would the outcome be for academic quality. So I would say that to create an environment to reinvention, the first step was to speak about this issue of how to proceed on reinventing themselves, because there are two different dimensions. One is that all professors are also individuals who are living a stressful time. So for us then to ask them to reinvent themselves, they have to be considered as individuals at the first time. So the tool of speaking out in small forums and then to preserve those spaces, to trying to reinforce support among peers, I believe, at least in my law school, turned out to be a very useful resource for faculty in these reinvention times. And then for mental health issues, I would say one of the challenges was, again, to speak with faculty and to students, because I believe the environment of reassurance has to be with whoever is the first respondent, so to speak, of the crisis before a student. And often it is the professors who are the first respondents of the crisis that students have. So they need to be more aware of what are they living through students, what are the type of manifestations stress has in the classrooms, and to have an ABC of how to diagnose these symptoms before they become a crisis for students. So in this reassurance, we had to work with the professors into better train them to identify the new scenarios that we're facing with students, and then to let students know that professors were prepared to be the first respondents, even if afterwards we reconvey them to the more broader support systems that we have at the university or the law school, for that matter.
Thank you very much, Jorge. Ian, could I ask you to share with us your preliminary reflections on these issue of creating a climate for reinvention and among the leadership on the one hand and psychological safety, taking into account mental health issues on the other?
Absolutely, Steve. Thank you very much. The question is, how do we create a climate of reinvention? And I think that as leaders, this for all of us as leaders is the Churchill moment. Everything we've done in our professional careers has led up to now, and all of us are under the microscope. This is the ultimate test of us as leaders. And as leaders, if we need to manage, and what we were doing back in March was managing, as Christiana talked about this so well, we were managing through an immediate crisis. But now, as she noted as well, it's an opportunity for us to start leading again. And to do that, we have to engender a climate of trust and faith and hope and belief in the possibility of a better tomorrow. That's what we have to do. To do that, we have to be on top of our game. We have to be au fait with technology ourselves, as Ron noted. We have to be engaged with mental health professionals, as all of my colleagues have noted. We also have to be authentic ourselves, and not to be afraid to show vulnerability, because people are seeing, in the way that we should behave, people can see the possibility of their better selves. At least ideally, that is the case. So we have to be much more personally aware than perhaps some of us might have been inclined to be in the pre-pandemic hurly-burly of rushing through lives and getting on planes and going to meetings and so on. Many of us, I think, felt that we missed the chance to pause and reflect. Well, now we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our organizations, to our faculty, our staff, and our students to be more consciously reflective. I want to say, though, that this is the leadership litmus test. And emotional intelligence is more important than ever. But the rub is that we are denied perhaps the most important tool that an emotionally intelligent leader has, and that is the ability to read body language. You know, we all know that what I call the third dimension is the most important dimension at all. We've been in meetings where someone may not say anything, but you can just see the inflection of the chin or the hunching of the shoulder, almost imperceptible. But you know that very slight movement of the body conveys far more information than words ever could. And so, you know, after the meeting, you can walk down the corridor and say, did I miss something? Is there something going on? Is there something, what's the real issue here? And we're cheated. This pandemic has cheated us of many things, but as leaders, that I think is one of the most profound things that it's cheated us of, is the ability to engage with our colleagues in the way that we are literally hardwired to in the third dimension. You know, as humans, we're social animals. We're meant to be able to shake hands and in some cultures hug and so on, and we're not able to do that. So the paradox, at the time when emotional intelligence is more needed than ever, we are denied one of the most critical tools, to use Ron's expression, in our tool chest.
Thank you very much, Ian. Let me shift now to the realities of the setup that people have as people are required to function usually from home. The pressure of their household responsibilities, the daily operations that transform their ability to be interactive in ways, regardless of physical presence, they are stuck where they are. And this is directly related to one of the most commonly cited realities of the pandemic we're suffering from, which is how it has brought to the surface inequalities. Inequalities, racial and class-wise, have always existed, but have been greatly exacerbated by the current conditions, the class divide. So what are and this of course can translate into the this was discussed in previous panels, very obvious challenge of internet access. Just to take that for one, people who are confined to their homes that might lack internet access because of where they live and the facilities that they have. So my question, I'm going to go back to Christiana for this one, is what are the particular concerns, what are the value of emotional intelligence as you attempt to address the specific context within which people are grappling with legal education from home, and in that context, how the inequalities in the class divide and racial divide and access to the internet can be influenced there. Christiana, would you like to address some of those issues?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. One of the first thoughts that came to our minds, I think, probably this is, I say our because I'm sure it's true of all of my colleagues on this call, when we had to disband from our physical plants in the springtime, is what a tremendous role our buildings serve as an equalizer. They assist our students in hiding where they come from. And that's true no matter who they are, right? Because they come to our building and they all sit in the same classrooms with the same professors, purportedly anyway, with the same opportunities in front of them. Disband from that physical structure, and rather than just receding back to their homes, which are widely disparate, you could no longer hide those disparities. Those disparities were laid bare. They were laid bare from the very first time that a class had to meet on Zoom, and some students didn't have a computer. We had to figure out how to get computers into their hands so that they could continue to meet. Students who were able to pretend like they were the same as their colleagues economically now had to say, I'm not, I can't. So those students who could use our physical structure as a crutch and an equalizer now had to demonstrate their incredible vulnerability. And that required a real delicacy, a real sort of sensitivity to those students who were also scared because of the pandemic, having to go back to locations where they knew they were going to be disadvantaged relative to some of their cohort, and now had to make themselves more vulnerable and demonstrate the incredible courage of doing that. So that was a real, I think, immediate lesson in the disparities between students. Add to that the disparities that come from, they're often associated with gender, but not always. Parenting and caretaking of elderly parents or grandparents or other people that were also, I think, often easy for students to hide. You don't always know which students in your classroom are parents, but all of a sudden you knew which students were parents because they had babies on their laps or kids running around or water spilling on their laptops during class. That also was a kind of chaos that students are used to being able to escape from for the brief spells that they're in our equalizing buildings. And that was laid bare and immediately. So, and then you bring on the summer and the tragic events of the summer that exposed racial divisions in not only our country but countries all over the world. We all knew about. We knew about these racial divisions, but again, just like we knew that there were disparities among our students, but the events of the summer, the incredible consciousness and intention, well merited. To racial divisions and cultural inequalities that the summer has brought on meant that our students came back to our Zoom classrooms in the fall with a really exposed, very sensitive perception of and lens on racial and cultural inequality that I think we're all really struggling with. All to say, I think those were the phenomena. The ways to deal with those have been, I think, a real challenge. Our students are struggling. Our students everywhere are struggling despite all best efforts, right? We've gotten our deans of students and gotten some additional support around our deans of students. We've gotten all of our on-campus counseling units, marshaled up to do Zoom counseling sessions whenever students need them. We do mental health and mindfulness events regularly. We have organized a weekly seminar on racial inequality in the United States and the legal aspects of that so that our students can be attuned to the intellectual side and the policy side of the issues that are really afflicting our country and bothering them personally, bothering all of us personally. And despite all of that, surveys among our students show that the time is wearing them thin. And that is, it just requires additional, longer attention and to be in really close communication with them.
Thank you very much, Christiana. This is obviously, you mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement that became worldwide, even though it started in the United States for obvious reasons. I'd like now to turn to Jorge and see how, from the perspective in Mexico, or any more generalities you want to raise on these same issues of the specific constraints on people functioning at home, where class divides and inequalities and racial divides come to the surface, including access to the internet and the rest. Jorge, what does it look like from your perspective?
No, it looks amazingly similar from what Christiana has just depicted. I'm a bit amazed to just learn that. In Mexico, we do have profound inequalities up front. We are a law school that prides itself on being specifically targeted for social mobility. We have 1/3 of our students being with full scholarship, and almost 40% of them come from outside of Mexico City. So we do pride that people that comes to this law school eventually gets social mobility one way or the other. But now in pandemic times, to keep being that motor of driving and changing lives to better opportunities has been challenging, as Christiana said. Perhaps two initiatives or two different ideas that have helped us to cope with that are one to have a very early detection of people who are not merely struggling, but who are facing perhaps the decision of dropping out or to postponing enrollments, or even engaging in student debt. We try to identify them early so we can let them know that this is not a decision for them to take alone, that we are here for them to coach them into what's next and to reassure them that this will pass, this will eventually pass too, and they have to embrace a more long-term vision within the components of the decision, so they can take better decisions in terms of how to restructure their goals. And this is a micromanagement process, and this takes time from students' dean and from my office. But I think this, once you get the word out that you can approach the law school and you can approach them for them to be part of their struggling, this is one response that makes them go into a better transition for this crisis.
Thank
And
you. Go ahead, continue.
And another initiative is that we realize that even if we have surveys and programs abroad across the law school, we need to have a welfare clinic to create solutions at the student level. That is, we need them to be engaged into new solidarity forms in order to build a new mesh of solidarity across students. And this has turned out to be quite interesting. The students have just created different initiatives to support other students in terms of how they noticed the performance of the underprivileged is very prone to just be there in competitive classrooms, but now has turned into initiatives to support them widely. And so I do believe that although we are in charge of providing them with infrastructure for trying to cope with these inequalities, I believe students are our first front in terms of being aware and being responsive to these issues and trying to somehow let them know with the specific actions that they can also rely on their fellow students.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jorge. Clearly, these two responses have indicated the outreach initiatives that have been taken to alleviate emotional stress. Let's get a perspective from Canada now. Ian, would you like to pick up on these points?
Sure. I want to say I love Christiana's description of the terms before, but it's absolutely true. And all of us now are seeing, because students get glimpses our homes look like, we get glimpses into what their living conditions are like. And that is, that can be profoundly unsettling, I know, for some of them. The tensions that you have seen in the United States, and as I've learned from Jorge, they've seen in Mexico, we've seen too, you know. Here in Calgary, Alberta, 30% of the people who live in Calgary were born outside of Canada. We're one of the most multicultural cities, multi-ethnic cities in North America. And in addition to our building being a great equalizer, in a way, I don't want to overstate this, but it was a unifier as well too. We physically brought people together from different backgrounds, different life experiences, and help them embark on a more or less common journey, or at least journeys with a lot of overlap. And I worry sometimes that we're starting to see that we're starting to see tension among and between groups. So you know, it hasn't happened yet, but I do worry. I will say sometimes that, you know, the Black Lives, the Black law students might think that it's a zero-sum game. There's one pie, and if I don't get a big piece, or, you know, if the Indigenous students get a big piece, or the Hispanic students, or the South Asian law students get a big piece, I'm going to get a smaller piece. And that's something that concerns me a great deal. And I don't want to sound like I'm repeating myself, but it's just much harder to mediate that when when you can't physically be together. You don't have the same human element or the same ability to break down the socioeconomic barriers that exist. So I think that all we can do is just try and to be alert. I loved Jorge's analogy to kind of like the early warning system. It means that individual profs as well as our student services staffs have to be more attuned to try to look for signals, and it can be something as innocuous as a student who, typically had her video on in Zoom class, all of a sudden starts keeping the video off. Now, we have to be careful that we're not coming across as being too intrusive, but, perhaps if a prof notices that, she or he might have a word with the assistant dean of students who might reach out to the students, say, things okay. There are things that we can do. All of this, of course, is exacerbated by budget cuts, which is the fate of at least many public schools, public law schools. I know it's Ron's and yours too, Christiana, as it is ours. So we don't quite have the same level of resources available to support these things as we did even a couple of years ago.
Thank you very much. Let's swing back south now again to Baltimore, which has had its share of issues concerning inequalities. How does this play out, and what is the role of emotional intelligence in your context and setting, Ron?
Yes. Well, thank you for noting that Baltimore has a history here. That's absolutely right. We have a history, long history of inequality. The geographic manifestations of that are well known. And specifically, we have a history of tension between law enforcement and citizens that was exposed nationally with the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. But the good news is there were structures and efforts and initiatives underway in Baltimore when things heated up this year that people could build upon. And so specifically on law enforcement reforms, Baltimore is under a federal consent decree that is working, where the federal court is monitoring a team of people who are working to improve policing in Baltimore. And then our law school is very involved, not just in that, but in other efforts to address income inequality in Baltimore. Our clinics are deeply involved in community development and domestic violence and immigration. We have clinics in each of those areas and others that are part of the fabric of the city in trying to improve conditions. And law students, I find, and Christiana and Ian and Jorge could say if they agree, but I think most law students come to law school to make the world a better place. There's the stereotype of law students punching a clock to get a high-paying job. I think that's not the case in most instances. And so the law students who came to law school have an opportunity to make a difference while they're in law school, and certainly after they graduate, to try and tackle these issues. And the law school has an obligation to provide the structure and opportunities for that through curricular issues like clinics, but then non-curricular opportunities, pro bono work, and other kinds of volunteer opportunities. So in Baltimore, we're well used to this question, and we've already been in the process of rolling up our sleeves to deal with these issues. And the challenges this year have made the need more acute, challenge us in a bigger way, but we're on it. We know what needs to be done, and we'll continue to do that. Emotional intelligence plays into all of this. It's the responsibility of the dean and other administrators and professors to recognize these challenges, to be able to moderate discussions in the classroom about inequality, and then direct students, guide students on the journey towards being change agents. So I'm proud of the way our law school deals with it, and I think law schools in general are forces for good in this environment.
Thank you very much indeed, Ron. The last set of questions I'd like to ask before we turn to the Q&A period has to do with something that you just mentioned, Ron, which is the impression that some people have had of the reason students go to law school is because they want to get into a law firm with and punch the clock and earn a lot of money, as you said, and have billable hours and rake in a fortune. And this that image of the law school is where they are trained to win cases, and that's what it's all about, is to how to take your client's interest and win. In doing so, it's sort of a zero-sum mentality, as it's been called. So what then is the role of emotional intelligence in creating an alternative culture of compassion, if there should be one? And how does this relate also to judging students? We've been judging students through testing, and other panels have focused on this, but you might have some other reflections on what is the role of leadership in involving emotional intelligence in how we train the students through the testing that we do for them and through the whole idea of what's expected of them in the legal profession. Are they supposed to be winning at all costs for their client and raking in a lot of money? Or does emotional intelligence play a role as we try to envisage a place for empathy and compassion in that? Christiana, do you have some thoughts on this?
I do, but I think I saw Ian with his hand up, so I want to defer if that in fact was a hand up.
I'm sorry, I should have caught that, Ian.
No problem. You were trying to formulate a question.
Yes.
Yeah, well, no, Christiana, that was very, very generous of you. So thank you so much. Yeah, you know, Steve, I think that you've just touched upon what is one of the most fascinating aspects of this. And as with so many things, that, you know, the pandemic hasn't necessarily caused changes. It's accelerated sort of the pace of change. And I think that one of the big existential questions that we have largely missed in law schools, at least in North America, has been who we admit to law school. You know, we admit primarily, and I'm generalizing, of course, but we admit primarily on the basis of perceptions about gray matter, for which we use the LSAT, at least in North America, the LSAT and GPA as proxies. We don't probe for emotional intelligence, empathy, resilience, all those other things when it comes to admissions. So perhaps one of the other lessons of the pandemic is that this is the moment when we owe it to ourselves. I don't want to sound corny, but when we owe it to the rule of law, the survival of the rule of law in our societies, to think about admissions differently. Because if we keep admitting the same old raw material, we shouldn't be surprised if the same old product comes out at the other end. So perhaps one of the things that we could do is search for tools with which we can assess in some better way things like EI and empathy and humanity and those sorts of things. And if we did that, that would be an example of us really not wasting this crisis.
Thank you very much. Who else would like to address this this complicated question of what is the nature of the legal profession that is inculcated in our students? Is it to win, and what is the place of compassion in that? If there's more to it than that? Yes, Jorge.
I wanted to bring this also from the viewpoint of how professors also have a mindset towards how are they training students. It's not merely, as Ian said, how we discriminate who gets into a law school, but also what is the collective intelligence of faculty producing the outcome. And in this, one very small symptom of how faculty was not aware of the value of this delta, as Stephen pointed out at the beginning of this conversation, in terms of emotional intelligence, is that they started this last May and some of this fall with certain prejudice towards what would the quality of the assessment be at the end of this term. And they coped with this prejudice. They reacted to this prejudice in different ways, but specifically trying to increment the level of difficulties to present more, even more extensive duties to students, instead of realizing that they had to react with a different approach towards how are they going to show students that in front of this very new scenario, they had to develop different emotional tools for them to be more engaged with their own education. So this signals to me that we also have to work more with faculty in terms of for them to realize how there are other important places to be developed as a lawyer, one of them being emotional intelligence, and also the value of being adaptive in terms of not putting themselves into an either or when they face the idea of the quality of the outcome in a specific course. So being inventive in terms of assessment also means recognizing that some of the components of the assessment has to be within this delta. That is emotional intelligence, high quality in terms of technicality within the law, and also to believe that the design and the orientation towards the future is also important.
Thank you very much. One of the questions that has been provided to us by the listeners is related to what you just said, Jorge, is how can the university administration develop and implement a deeper sense of compassion towards its students as well as staff? Would anybody like to expand on that a little bit with some thoughts? Shall I?
I'm happy to address that, Stephen. So it was very clear to us that all of the mechanisms that we usually have for being in touch with our students and with our staff were gone when our ability to use our physical plant in its normal ways. We do have in-person classes, but we're really just supposed to be there for those purposes and those purposes alone, and then out the door. All those tools were gone, and so we were going to have other ways of being in touch. And so we have regular meetings with students, both with focus groups of students, with a dean's council, and also with a regular town hall for the entire student body early on as we were planning the curriculum before we set it in stone so that we could move forward with it. We had sort of a listening tour with our 1Ls, our incoming 1Ls, as well as with our upper level students, so they could give us input in what we were designing. And then throughout the semester, we've had regular meetings with our students so that we can be hearing what their reactions are as we go, because what looked good in August is starting to look a little less attractive now that students are realizing that there was no fall break, that they have a January term that they're not accustomed to, that there is no spring break in the schedule. And that starts to feel a lot different in November than it did in August. With our staff as well, and so that we can adapt, right? And we're now making some adaptations to our schedule based on the current reality for our students. With our staff as well, our staff have been very stressed, and a little less now than they were during the summer when financial uncertainty was so high that we really weren't sure. We really weren't sure whether we were going to have to make cuts in our staff. And there's nothing that's going to create stress among our staff more than that during a period, especially when staff were often feeling redundant because the jobs that they did were not possible online, and we hadn't yet invented or figured out how to reinvent their positions so that they were fully employed, really gainfully productive for the benefit of the law school. And that must have felt very, very scary to them to feel underutilized during a time when there was financial uncertainty. And so having regular meetings with them to help assure them and to create fluid communication and instant communication was, I think, incredibly helpful and helped to build trust and goodwill. And I will say that there was a tremendous amount of trust and goodwill from the students and from our staff going into this. And I think we'll get through it with our students, and I know that it has continued with our staff. our students are really, I mean, all students everywhere right now, they're really suffering.
Thank you so much, Christiana. A particular slant on what Christiana just explained is one of the questions that we have from the audience, which is, several students across universities around the world started their higher education immediately after school straight into an online mode. How differently should the needs of students from the fresher batch, that is the first year students, the 1Ls, be addressed in order to add a personal touch to their transition from schooling to higher education? Now, of course, that question is posed from an Indian perspective, where you go from secondary education into law school. And obviously we don't do that in North America. We finish university and then go into law school as a professional school. But if you can adapt this question to your own setting, is that there are students who are entering as 1Ls and suddenly they have no physical presence in a law school, an experience that is denied them. How do you address the emotional consequences of that? It's been answered in several ways in previous questions, but I wonder if it stimulates any other thoughts by any of our panelists. And that is, yeah, go ahead.
I'll take a stab at it, Steve. Yes, this is really hard for first-year law students. The ones who have come straight from college, of course, were deprived of all of the ceremonies and good feelings from graduating from college, and then they come to law school and right away they're in these Zoom boxes instead of with classmates in the building, and that's just been awful. In our school, while we haven't been able to have classes in the building for the most part, although the clinics are there and there are some clinic classes, but first year classes are uniformly being taught remotely. The Student Bar Association has played a very important role in creating events, opportunities for students to come together outside of classes. So we've had, in the nicer weather, a tennis tournament and runs and a kind of a socially distant picnic in a Baltimore park. And that's been so important. First year professors have worked extra hard to create opportunities for students to be together, either in person in a socially distant way, or facilitating remote interactions, study groups and small groups within classes that can meet online and have real conversations. But with all of that, it is hard. And I tell the first year students, this isn't going to be your full 3 years or 4 years in the case of the evening students. Just bear down, get through this. And I expect that at some point next year, we'll be back in the building. It's so important for law students to have the benefit of camaraderie and the networking that comes in a law school class, not just with fellow students, but with professors and alumni. They're missing that now, or it's stunted in the two-dimensional world. But they'll get there. We'll get there. We're all going to get through this, and by next year it will be better. I truly believe that.
Nice to have an optimistic perspective. Ron, you answered one of the other questions here, and I'd like to pose it the way it's been posed in the audience questions so that others can respond to it. One of the questions is, since teacher-student interaction has become restricted to screens and effectively chat boxes, it has become very mechanical in nature. How can the faculty incorporate a sense of personal touch similar to pre-COVID times within the virtual classroom framework? How do you get this personal touch? Yes, please, Ian.
I think that's a great question. And I think that there are actually lots of opportunities to make the personal touch in a way as meaningful, and in a different way, but as meaningful as it was before. I have a colleague here who is a keen amateur musician, and he teaches constitutional law, and he says to the students, if you are able to brief the case properly, I'll write a song on a subject of your choosing. And the students have great fun with that. Another prof who runs trivia contests regularly as part of his class. When the weather was nicer, like Ron, we had some socially distanced, picnics, and there was and things like that. I myself meet regularly with first year, with all students of all years, but particularly with small groups of first year students, with no particular agenda other than to keep in touch. So it's different, but in a different kind of way. It's actually given us a delightful, fresh opportunity to bond with our students that we wouldn't have had when we did things in the way that we were just accustomed to doing them over generations.
Thank you. That was an excellent response to that question of the personal touch. I would like, as a way in the 5 minutes remaining, to give everyone a chance to highlight the themes of emotional intelligence and legal education that you have expressed here and would like to add, by asking each of you to respond to the following question. For students of law who are watching this, what would you like to tell them as they experience this crisis, along with their studies in law schools, but also the possible impact on their future careers in law and justice? How do you think they should deal with uncertainty? So this is your opportunity to address the law students or the prospective law students who are watching this, and let's take them in the order that we started with. You can also use this opportunity to give your final reflections on this whole panel. So Christiana, what would you like to say in response to this question, what you'd like to tell law students in times of uncertainty?
I love that the question ends with the word uncertainty. Uncertainty is one of the great human challenges. We all love to have something to hold on to and to predict and to know it is true and solid and reliable. And as much as we believe we have that at any given time, we know that that sort of reliability is always somewhat of a fiction. Unpredictability and uncertainty is just a feature of being human. This year has just brought it into really extreme relief. And so I think what I would say is that there is one thing to say at a sort of very meta level is that it's a terrific opportunity to practice being comfortable with uncertainty. There will always be uncertainty in your life. That said, I think this year has been a great opportunity for other things as well. It's been a tremendous opportunity to get very good at things that you knew you needed to practice, whether that's technology or emotional strength or networking. It's been a great opportunity to really work on those skills. It's also, I think, been a great opportunity to think about what really matters to us. So if what really matters to you is that you have a financially stable career and that you work at a law firm, that's a great thing to know. But it might be that the events of this year, the Black Lives Matter protest, the immigration phenomenon on the southern U.S. border, whether it's the frailty of democracy all over the world, but there are lots of things that have been really exacerbated this year and are very, very clear in a way that they maybe weren't 3 or 4 years ago. And to really focus on what matters to you and to work on the skills that will make your ability to practice in those areas possible, I think is the very best thing you can do with your time in law school.
Thank you very much, Christiana. Jorge, your final thoughts to current or prospective law students watching this?
As you might know, in Mexico, we do have this system where after high school, they start law school in the LLB. So I would say that for prospective law students or for students who are initiating this year right after high school, that this time will pass and that we can learn from ourselves to better face this uncertainty. I will say unto you that you are not alone, that all professors are also facing stressful times, and that we are here for you, and that we also have the opportunity to do two different things that the pandemic has gave us the opportunity to do. One is to realize that we are a community, more stronger than ever in the pandemic times, and that this is a value, that you are entering a fraternity of people, whether they are your colleagues, your students, or your professors, that we together can face anything, including these uncertain times, and that you can rely on us. And the second opportunity is that for the legal profession, for the future, there are many different opportunities that weren't there simply because we didn't need them to be there. And that now more than ever, we can reshape and rethink what the legal practice would look like. And I will invite you to rethink carefully whether the traditional paths that you have had in mind will still be there afterwards, after the pandemic, and that perhaps new futures awaits for you, and that we are all again in this together, devising these new paths. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jorge. For the audience, as you know, in most of the panels so far, and the 9 that preceded this one, the end time has been very strict. Since this is the last panel of the day, we do not have that stricture, so we can listen to all that the remaining 2 panelists want to say about this concluding observation about, to law students who are watching this, how should they deal with uncertainty. So it gives me pleasure, without time constraints, to give the floor to Ian.
Thanks, Steve. We sometimes forget in law schools that our mission is not to train our students to be lawyers like us. What I often say is that our mission is to prepare students for the profession they're joining, not the one we join. And while none of us wanted to be in the situation of having to live through this pandemic, it actually is an extraordinary learning opportunity in terms of being prepared for the profession of the future. Christiana talked about the certainty of uncertainty. It's an opportunity to build resilience, to develop capacity in ourselves to cope with stress, with unfamiliarity, with technological glitches on the fly. So while it isn't fun, while like Ron, I pray that next year we're all going to be back in our buildings. The reality is that this is a wonderful learning opportunity that, as Jorge said, all of us are going through together. And so seize the moment, make the best opportunity of this unpleasant set of circumstances that were forced upon us. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much indeed. And finally, Ron, without time limit, your observations to share with the current or potential law students about uncertainty in the future.
So in the American pastime of baseball, the person who bats fourth is called the cleanup hitter. Steve has given me the opportunity to be the cleanup hitter here. I recognize that many of our audience members follow sports other than baseball, and I don't know if there's an equivalent in cricket or other sports, but I'll try and seize the moment of batting fourth and final to kind of tie things up here with a couple of observations. One, seizing on, really building on what others have said, this is a challenge, but we tell lawyers, we tell law students that lawyers are problem solvers. And this is certainly a problem. And this is a moment that they can seize to take advantage of their problem-solving skills, to adapt, to be resilient, a very important word that Ian used early on here. So this circumstance challenges them in ways that they will be challenged throughout their legal careers with different obstacles and different threats that will arise and challenges, and they can rise to the occasion, and we should encourage them to do that. But finally, I'll come back to the issue of emotional intelligence, the central theme of our panel. You know, Steve at one point said, are we training these law students to just win cases? Is that what it's all about? And of course it's not. The profession is much more complex than that. And what we really want to do is use our emotional intelligence to train our students to deploy their emotional intelligence. Lawyers, of course, are storytellers, whether it's in the courtroom or the negotiation session in transactional law or in other settings. Lawyers need to be able to tell a story persuasively and concisely and effectively. And that's about emotional intelligence. Law is about relationships, relationship among colleagues, adversaries, with the judge in a courtroom, in a legislature. And all of that calls upon emotional intelligence. So this is a moment when we really need to, the Winston Churchill moment, Ian, I love that. It's our finest hour. This is a moment when we need to call upon all of our emotional intelligence to bring the students to a place where they can most effectively develop and use their emotional intelligence while they're law students and then when they become lawyers. And I think we're going to be training a great generation of lawyers through this difficult time.
Thank you very much indeed, Ron. I'm going to turn the floor over to Abhinav now to wind this up, but I cannot resist expressing emotionally, and I'm saying this quite sincerely and from the heart, how moved I have been by the wisdom, competence, compassion, and empathy expressed by all four panelists. It is trite to say it has been a privilege to be part of this, but I really mean it this time. And in a genuine expression of emotion, I have been greatly privileged to hear from each and every one of you. And Abhinav, where do we go from here?
I would like to sort of conclude this evening. It's been a wonderful day today, and I don't think I could have found, we could have thought of a better way of wrapping this up. Emotional intelligence in law school governance or any format of education has always been very important, but I think it has only become all the more pertinent with how the COVID-19 pandemic has shaped up. And I am absolutely deeply grateful to Professor Jorge, Professor Ian, Professor Christiana, Professor Ronald for being here today as our distinguished speakers, and of course, Professor Stephen Marks, who's been with us for so long. It's so wonderful to have him here to chair this session. So thank you very much for being with us today. We're very grateful you could make some time for us. And I know in your part of the world, you're going to enter your Thanksgiving weekend, so have a wonderful weekend ahead. And we look forward to collaborating with all of you in the future as well. Thank you so much.